start with you.
The highlights. Well, first of all, the biggest highlight is that we scaled the day. That's the biggest highlight. The fact that we continue doing this, we are normalizing it, and we're getting to a point where it's beginning to look almost normal, and people don't even realize or pay too much attention to the problem.
Was anybody ever in any doubt that this will not, happen and pass smoothly?
Well, few people were in doubt, but it just may not have happened. We don't, again, perhaps 1979, how many years already? 1981, sorry. 81. How many years already? 40-something years already, but it's not in the distant past. And the point I'm making to you is it takes one military adventurer. It takes one false step, and a country suddenly will have to recalibrate itself and be careful about things. So the point I'm making is I'm grateful that we have taken it for granted, that we all know 7th of January was coming, and it was coming to pass, and it did come to pass. So the biggest highlight of the moment is that 7th of January has come to pass, and Ghana has once again stood still and stood together, and we're moving on. But beyond that, I think the other highlight laid in the president's message. I think the president's speech contains 4 key aspects of what I consider an inauguration speech should have. And I'll list them as follows. The first one is that I think an inauguration speech should mark a moment for a fresh start. The second one is that a speech should be a moment of reckoning. That where do we stand, and therefore how do we move forward? The third one is that a speech must be a statement of a vision. What is a vision? What are you selling to us? And the fourth one is that there must be a rallying cry of the charge and the work ahead of us. And I think the speech seems to have highlighted all these key things for me. So if you take the first one, the fact that it's a moment for a fresh start, I think the president, in many parts of his speech, but certainly one part I remember, kept saying that people are increasingly speaking about hope. The fact that there's a need for a fresh start. We are where we are. We may have experienced all kinds of things in the last 8 years and beyond.
It's a restart, not a fresh start. Restart.
Restart.
Those are the words.
Indeed. But restart is a fresh start. Because what you're doing essentially is that you stopped something, and you are beginning it again, or you're restarting it. So it is a fresh start. That moment of freshness is good for every country. A country must go through a process in which the country begins anew, in which a country becomes refreshed, and the country re-energizes itself and moves forward. I think an inauguration speech, the whole essence of inauguration, the fact that you are starting something new, should signify or signal that moment for a new start. And I was about to say fresh start again. And I do hope, Joyce and the NDC doesn't say I'm changing the restart and the fresh start, but the moment for something anew. So I think the speech in that sense captured that, and the president was at pains to keep highlighting and re-emphasizing that, the fact that we stand in the moment of newness, and that moment of newness is going to signal an about turn of things that do not have to happen. I think it's imperative in this case to say that it seems that a lot of the members of the MPP themselves realized that some things just did not go right. And I think at some point, perhaps there should have been more listening to the public, listening to Hajia, for instance. Hajia did mention that it does seem that perhaps more consultation or deeper consultation should have been done, deeper listening to the public should have happened. It appears that there was a cleavage at a point in time between the governors and the governed, and some things were pushed through regardless of the public sentiments of things. And the Ghanaian public have shown that when they're tired of things, they stop talking. And when they stop talking, that is the most dangerous moment for every government, because then they are waiting for a decision moment.
Fear delegates.
Well, perhaps. So the fresh start moment, it signifies that. But the second point, which has to do with the reckoning, and I think the president's speech again touched fundamentally on this. He spent a lot of time trying to recap how things haven't gone right, and how much of a difficult space and place Ghana finds itself. I think as a country, very few people, whatever the political divide and persuasion is, very few people will deny the reality, and the reality of the fact that Ghana is not in a good place. The fact that we're sinking under a high debt burden, the fact that corruption remains rampant, regardless of the evidence people may not be able to produce, the fact that the cost of living is astronomical and killing of the average person, and the fact that as a country, we appear not to be getting things right and we're losing our way.
So he said we will focus our initial efforts on 4 critical areas: economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment, improvement of the business and investment environment, governance and constitutional reforms, and accountability and the fight against corruption. So you just summarized that.
Correct. Thank you very much for that. The fact that he appears to have recognized and identified the key drivers and levers that will move us out of that. And I'll come to that in my third point on the question of vision. But at this stage, the question of reckoning, the difficulties we have, the fact that corruption remains a problem, including what you highlighted earlier, and some things you mentioned in the speech, the 2020 West Wuogon election. I said West Wuogon because I was on the commission.
General election.
But the 2020 difficulties to the general election, for example, the fact that a whole commission was set up, the fact that the commission, and I'm saying this because I was on the commission, the fact that a commission was set up, the fact that the commission came out with recommendations, and the fact that 2/3 of the recommendations have not been implemented. We spent money on that. So there are a number of things that will baffle the neutral observer, that will baffle the political person, so to speak. And so the reality is that
he has been personally assisting some of the victims. So he appreciates this issue that you raised for Ayawaso West Wuogon, for example.
It remains a major concern. I'll tell you what, I have been particularly concerned and in some cases, annoyed at the failure to implement the Ayawaso Commission report because the consequences of Ayawaso were repeated in the last election. They keep getting repeated or being repeated from election to election, and they are low-hanging fruits every government can implement that will resolve matters. I would recommend that the Ayawaso Commission report should be looked at and fully or at least substantially implemented. It will solve a lot of the problems. So in terms of reckoning, the president's speech appeared to have realized or recognized the fact that Ghana is not in the best of places. Indeed, the quantum of electoral percentage win that he had itself was a statement to the fact that Ghana was in a good place. Because if we are transitioning from a former government to a new government, and the new government got such a big mandate, it's a logical statement of the fact that the former government hasn't done that well. If it did that well, you wouldn't have that quantum leap from that former government to another government, not of the same party. So in terms of implicit statement, the election itself spoke volumes, and the president was merely endorsing and recognizing the fact that we aren't in a good place. That's for reckoning. And then the third one being on the vision, which is what he listed. He listed the 4 key critical areas, from governance reform to the business climate, to combating and fighting corruption. I think one thing the president appears to have done very quickly is to realize that Ghanaians watch from day one. And I think as Ghanaians watch from day one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think oral was established before even the president was inaugurated.
That's right.
And that became some bit of a contestation. People were even asking, what mandate he had at the time, and they indicated that, look, this is just a preparatory. It's a statement of what is coming. But I think clearly there's an increasing recognition that the statement on corruption cannot be used as a political trump card, or as a political trump card which is not intended to be followed on with, or by way of implementation. The NPP, for example, in 2016, made a lot of, so to speak, political capital on corruption. Ghanaians expected action. Between that time and now, it appears, and the average person will say, that corruption has rather grown in leap and bounds. So instead of rather scaling things back and making progress, we appear to have accentuated or rather worsened the difficulty of the challenge. It seems the president appears to have himself learned the lessons of his former office, because he was a former president. So having been there before, having paid a price in 2016, having had the chance to come back.
Some say that's an advantage to him, that he's been there before.
Have one advantage, perhaps no other president in the history of Ghana has had before. Because no president in the history of Ghana has had a political vacation. He appears to have had that. He was in office, then he had a vacation. And then that vacation may have allowed him the requisite reflection, the opportunity of taking a step back and watching things from afar, the opportunity of therefore having a comparative framework of things, and therefore the ability to make better judgments. So it seems that his speech, once again, and his action is being reflected or informed by that. And then the final one, in terms of the 4 elements that I indicated about inauguration speeches, which has to do with the rallying cry, it seems that, again, the president charged all of us. And I would hope that from an implementation standpoint, Ghana moves a bit away from the us and them. I think we have seen too much of that in the past. the tendency in which elections become political loss, not just political loss, but it becomes an economic loss for some people. The tendency in which election becomes a deficit for some segments of the populace, and others are kept out of the loop of entitlement until they have to wait and pray for another government coming to office. We have to get out of that. And remember that elections end on the 7th of December. And when elections end, the country must close ranks. We must come together, we must join forces and get engaged in the business of nation building. I did see or hear a chunk of that in the president's speech, and I must say that I was quite heartened. I was heartened to hear that we are one Ghana, we are one people, we are going to move forward because the forces of poverty, the forces of suffering, the forces of underdevelopment, these know no political color. In the end, we're in this together. I think that the Constitution only recognizes election as the point of division for purposes of ideas. But once we go past that, the Constitution charges us under the directive principle of state policy that we should come together and develop this country. So I was very heartened listening to the president's message and inauguration speech and seeing the beautiful colors of the kente cloth and the the flag colors, and the entire display of oneness as a country. And the beauty of it, seeing all these foreign dignitaries there, the spotlight, the country being spotlighted by
and the special 4 symbols that he intentionally chose with his tailor.
Well, I was educated. I didn't know some of the meanings. I was educated. I think I was listening to the morning show.
That's right.
2-3 days ago, and Professor Adai-Mensah.
Yes, Ivan Adai-Mensah, former VC of the University of Ghana.
Educated all of us about the meanings of those symbols. I think it's, as a country, it's beautiful to have a moment like this when you can see the country is still represented, for example, on the leader's dress, and suddenly we have to all go to school and get to learn about them. So I think something beautiful happened on the 7th of January, and I'm delighted that as a country, and we have to commend the NPP as well, you know, and this is the part of it as well. Look, it's true that the defeat was heavy, and there's little to say by way of challenge and contestation, but there's been some sobriety, and there's been some silence and peace, and an acknowledgement that it is done, and we're moving forward. And I do hope that...
He acknowledged Dr. Baumia for the early concession.
Indeed, and I saw the picture.
Yeah, but some say, why? Did he have a choice, really?
Well, no,
if you are decimated in this manner, could you afford not to save face?
No, absolutely. Look, I saw Dr. Baumia bowing before him. I heard the president acknowledge him and thank him for his early concession and what that did to the soul and peace of Ghana. There was an acknowledgement of political maturity on stage. Now, mind you, we had so many heads of state who were there.
That's right.
There are many African countries.
21 of them
who were watching on.
24 envoys.
And I'm confident that many of these leaders will go back to their countries and suddenly they will try and mimic some of the things that they saw. So what we saw on the 7th was a demonstration and acknowledgement once again of the Ghanaian maturity. We have always been worried prior to election. We've always come out feeling proud. And I'm happy and confident that all the stakeholders and collaborators who have made this possible, it is once again an opportunity for us to just pat ourselves on the back, but more importantly, start the arduous task of lifting the common people out of poverty who daily sacrifice their little toil for the sake of Ghana. For the safety and prosperity of Ghana. And so I'm delighted about what happened on Saturday.
The symbolism, positive or negative, of bringing Tuareg.
I think it's absolutely positive. Now, I'll tell you something. First of all, the inauguration was a celebration of democracy. But how do you change non-democrats to become democrats? By showing them an example. I guarantee you, if Tuareg would decide that he is going to go civilian, it's perhaps maybe because he stood on a platform that advocated one thing, that the virtue of governance laid in democracy. You don't change people from the outside, you get them involved.
This is a military junta, and he gets the loudest applause among the foreign leaders who were there.
That was the worrying part. Yeah. The worrying part was the fact that the statement that democracy delivers the public goods may be overstated and may be in some ways wrong. The fact that people have the right to say whatever they want. People can sit in the studio like this and say all kinds of things. But what I was worried about is the fact that I saw him greeting the president with a pistol on his side. That, I'm telling you, was... So, but that's for the security people, security experts. But I was a bit worried about that aspect. Beyond that, however, I think it was a perfect example it was a perfect scenario of seeing him on the platform of example, so that if he has any plans of changing, that was the moment for him to see how best to become a civilian government. I don't think the best way is to keep him out. We don't achieve anything by excluding him. No. In any case, he's our neighbor. And so the idea that you keep your neighbor out in the interest of democracy, when we have border scenarios or border difficulties, who do we call?
And it was good to also learn that a day after or so, he had meeting with the president, and they seemed to, be engaging in a way that may bring some fruits that many are expecting, that he too may transform, so that Burkina base will begin to also see democracy, the return to democracy. You've been listening to Professor Kofi Abotsi, Dean, UPSA Law School, and we will take a break here. When we return,